My name is Gianni Russo, a.k.a. Carlo, the infamous son-in-law from The Godfather. I'm now known as the Hollywood Godfather, and this is my story.
Before all of the wins in my portfolio, I was a little boy diagnosed with polio. Experimenting with cures, I tried every one. Felt everything in my right, but my left was numb. Walking with a limp, like will I ever run? Once again, or is this it? Am I forever done? Living in the hospital was never fun. Some people were cool, but not everyone. You never know who you're lying in a room with. So I broke a broomstick in half and let it groove with the concrete in the bathroom floor. It had a new tip, stashed it behind the toilet in case I ever had to use it. Cause one day Dolores...
Speak softly loud and hold me warm against your heart. I hear your words, the tender tremble.
Welcome, everybody, for another Hollywood Godfather. Hollywood Godfather podcast.
That's us, man.
That's us. Yeah. I'm so excited about the continuation of Mark's from last week. This is insane, this information. And it's...
Yeah, I love that quote by Joe Kennedy saying, if I don't have sex every day, I get a headache. Which reminds me, you excuse me, I have to go get an aspirin. I'll be back. No.
That wasn't Joe's quote, though. That was Jack Jr.
Okay, Jack, Joe. Now it's
mirror image of his father.
Exactly.
Okay, we are welcoming back Mark Shore, who laid the groundwork for what he is about to tell us. We had very interesting comments from him. Once again, a phenomenal researcher, very, very, very diligent. And now we're going to get into the meat of this. Mark has uncovered an informant that nobody has ever interviewed. This person has never spoken to anybody about this. And Mark Shore has the scoop. So without any further delay, we return to Mark Shore. How you doing, Mark?
Well, just fine. Thanks, guys, again for having me. As you know, in the last program we set up the whole thing with the Warren Commission, and we had some conversations that I don't believe anybody has ever paid any attention to. Audio tape conversations between LBJ and Hoover, deciding how they're going to stack the deck on the Warren Commission with only people who will look into Oswald alone theories. That's it. It's not going to go any further than that. They're not going to let that happen, and I'll explain why in a little bit. There's one other conversation that I want to just give you, because it does bring Dorothy Kilgallen, who we talked about before, the famous journalist, the woman of integrity, into the fold here. They had another conversation on October 31st of 1964, these two men, and they're talking about some issues they have with whoever is writing columns or articles, wondering about what happened with JFK and everything else like that. And in here, they're saying that LBJ says, or J. Edgar Hoover says, I think that, of course, as we get get nearer to next Tuesday, I think the likelihood of this rumoring going along that they can't prove and not will be able to prove, unless, of course, one of these dirty columnists is very apt to carry something in her column. Well, doesn't take too much imagination to know they're talking about the dirty columnist being Dorothy Kilgallen. They were scared to death of her because she's the only one that's crossed ways with the whole Oswald alone.
And has the credibility.
Absolutely. So what happened here? Well, I had found information, in the conversations where they do admit that Jack Ruby had connections with the Dallas Police Department. And, we know about that, and we're not going to look into it, but we know about that. We're not going to really look into Ruby doing anything. We're just going to look into Oswald, so they're not going to do with that. And that presented me with a situation because Dorothy had written a column, claimed Dallas cops lived it up at Ruby's place. And Dorothy had gone ahead, because she's in New York City, she had some acts that she had promoted in her column. And she talked to some of them, and they said, oh, yeah, we used to go over to Jack Ruby's Carousel Club, And their police were everywhere. They were comp.
They were all on the payroll.
They were on the payroll over there.
And they
So
had, I'll tell you something better. They had 40 slot machines in the back.
Exactly.
Let it go.
Exactly. And then I found an FBI file that said, Ruby was in good with the police department. So, remember, that's that's how he was able to get into the damn basement and shoot Oswald, because the police were there, of course. Okay. So they also talk about, by the way, that a big problem for them is this crazy attorney on the West Coast who's representing Jack Ruby. Well, that's obviously, who is that? That's Melvin Belli. One photograph I want to show you before we go any further, and people can see it in the book. And really, in the book, all of this is set in context, so you can see how it goes. That is LBJ at his ranch with his really nice-looking cowboy boots and Alan Dulles. Very fascinating to me that they were doing that. Okay, so then I went back and I looked at, what do I need to know about these members of the Warren Commission? I don't know why this information lands on my lap. I've ended up, and I'm going to brag a little bit about this. Dorothy had the best sources. And yeah, why? Because she was a woman of the truth and she was respected and all that. I believe I've, over the years, been able to develop that sort of reputation, but I have no idea, why some of this evidence that was out there was never looked into. I didn't look into the Warren Commission. Others didn't either. So it's last February, and I'm working, on getting the book all done for its publication, which is on the 29th of November, just not too long. And so anyway, I'm working on that, and I get an email. Mr. Shaw, I just watched one of your presentations at that famous Dallas library on your most recent book, Collateral Damage, where I connected the deaths of Marilyn Monroe, Dorothy Kilgallen, JFK, and so on and so forth. You had me on to talk about that book. And he said, I noticed that you talk about Dorothy Kilgallen. And I said, yes. And he said, in fact, that particular YouTube video went viral. There's about 7.5 million views of my material up on YouTube, which I'm very proud of. And that's where I've gotten a lot of my evidence. So this guy says, well, Mark, Mr. Shaw, I knew Dorothy. And that always perks my ears up, because there's not that many people around that still do.
Right.
How I wish I had known her. Anyway, so he says, I need to talk to you. So I call this man, and his name is Morris Wolf. He's not been identified until now. Morris Wolf is an amazing human being. A graduate of Yale, a distinguished graduate, and Amherst College before that, law school. He ended up being in Washington, D.C., he told me, and he said, I was one of the first jobs I had, I was recommended to Robert Kennedy. And I worked for Bobby Kennedy as kind of an assistant and gopher in some ways. And I knew Jack Kennedy when Jack Kennedy was in the White House. And in fact, I used to go ahead, and you'll see more, people will read more about this relationship, but you'll get a kick out of this, because the Kennedys asked him to pass matters of national security between the White House and the Justice Department, either riding his bicycle or walking between the two or running between the two, because they couldn't be sure that J. Edgar Hoover wasn't tapping their phones.
How old is this gentleman we're talking about?
He's 87.
Okay.
They couldn't be sure that JFK wasn't tapping their phones.
J. Edgar Hoover.
J. Edgar Hoover wasn't tapping their phones. So that, lit up my mind. Wait a minute, what? Oh, come on. He said, yes. And I worked on Title II of the Civil Rights Act for Bobby Kennedy. And I can tell you about, and this is more in the book, I think people will get a kick out, the relationship between the Kennedys, kind of a playful jealousy, that everything was okay, except that JFK got upset when Bobby's name was in the newspaper too much. Nobody's ever talked about that, but that's what he told me.
Well, it's their egos,
And I want you to know that I've confirmed this material. It sounds too good to be true. It almost sounds like it can be fiction, but it's not. So where do we go from there? Well, he says the next thing just blew my mind. My wife will tell you I yelled. because he said, I did know Dorothy Kilgallen. And that's when I was a legislative assistant to one of the Warren Commission members. And I said, really? He said, yes. Bobby Kennedy recommended me to this man to be a legislative assistant. And so I started working for him. And I did errands and things, but also, Mr. Shaw, I should tell you that I rode with him in his car. He was a tall man and he had trouble getting in his Saab, but I traveled with him to the hearings. I said, the Warren Commission hearings? He said, absolutely. And at one point, I would be waiting for him, and I would sit in the back row, and I could hear this. Nobody's ever gotten inside the Warren Commission all these years. I wanted to say to him, it's 60 years. Why didn't you come forward with this information? And basically, what I believe is he felt loyalty to this particular member, whose name is John Sherman Cooper of Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, Mr. Shaw, I just have to go ahead and I have to tell you, I want to say one more thing about Morris before I go any further. You talk about a man of credibility and a man of distinction. He was the attorney who worked for years to try to get Raoul Wallenberg, who was the Swedish gentleman who saved, they say, about 100,000 lives during the Holocaust out of a Russian prison. He worked without pay. He tried to do that forever. He wrote a book about it, Whatever Happened to Raoul Wallenberg. And that particular book, there's excerpts from it in Fighting for Justice. It's in here, as it should be, because it was a monumental task that he took on. And right away when he said that, I thought, my gosh, you're a male version of Dorothy Kilgallen. You're a man of the truth, and you went all over all this, and you did whatever you could. He couldn't get, in fact, he told me the story that he couldn't get, that all once it looked like Wallenberg would be released, and then a man named John Roberts got involved. And John Robert poisoned the deal by getting it into the political world with Ronald Reagan, and Wallenberg ended up in staying in that Russian prison forever. Well, you know who John Roberts is. That's the chief of the Supreme Court Justice. So anyway, so he's saying to me, all right, well, I went there. And then he starts in, and he starts telling me about things. He says, Mark, LBJ was very crafty when it came to strangling or milking information from various sources. LBJ and Hoover had a bad habit and practice of sidestepping Attorney General Kennedy. The Attorney General was to have been, according to protocol, the first point of contact for any president to make into the Justice Department. Hoover technically was under Bobby Kennedy, but a practice of constant circumvention existed, and Bobby knew all about it. He was peeved, pissed, and angry about the practice. And so he knows this information as he ends up with John, as being John Sherman Cooper, a legislative assistant. What did Morris Wolf tell me? Well, he told me some of the things that Senator Cooper said to him on the way to the hearings. He called Senator Cooper a man of truth, a maverick politician. And you're going to hear in a few minutes or so Jackie Kennedy's admiration for John Sherman Cooper. He's very skeptical of the slipshod job being done by the commission staff and its rush to judgment. The commission doesn't get it. It's more than Oswald. But Warren and Hoover keep pushing the Oswald alone idea. There's something very wrong going on the commission. My views, and these are just a few of the things that you'll read, that people read in the book. My own views are different than the report conclusion. And then this one is the one that just struck me with a knife when I heard it. Talk about betrayal of the American people and the world in terms of what happened. They say this Oswald alone business is good for God and country, but there is corruption, and I don't know why. And then they know about the Ruby connection to organized crime. They don't want to touch it, but instead stick to the single bullet theory.
That was all, as we know. I mean, now hindsight is 20/20, but J. Edgar Hoover was controlled by Costello for a long time.
Well, he may have been, because Costello wouldn't have wanted anything to get out about the assassination in terms of who was responsible and all that.
No.
And so what did I do next? Okay. with any source that you get. I knew about his impeccable credentials and everything, guys, but I wanted to make sure that I gave the reader confirmation of some of these things. As you guys know, I'm blessed that my alma mater, Purdue University, is archiving my body of work. It's one of the great honors of my life, that they think enough of me. They've called me a distinguished alumni, and I always laugh at that because I almost dropped out of college. I was such a terrible student. But anyway, these oral histories are gold. So I went, I think especially an investigator like Patrick would have done this. I wanted to see if there were oral histories of Senator John Sherman Cooper. I went to the University of Georgia, even though he graduated from the University of Kentucky. And what I found was the other dissident among the Warren Commission members was Senator Richard Russell of Georgia. And he and Senator Cooper were very close friends. And they both, and I'll read you a couple of things that Senator Cooper wrote in memos that I think you'll find interesting. And so he and Russell went to the University of Georgia. So they were, both disappointed in terms of what was going on. And you'll see the action that they took, although J. Edgar Hoover never let it happen. So we went in there, and I found out that Russell and Cooper had demanded in the report a dissent. And the dissent had to do specifically with rejecting this silver bullet theory that never made any sense then and doesn't make any sense now. Cyril Wecht, who you may have had on your program, the distinguished forensic scientist who's been a great supporter of mine and everything, he said the whole Warren Commission report was just the worst one he's ever seen regarding the death of somebody like a President Kennedy. It just made no sense whatsoever. And so both of them wanted a dissent. They wanted to, Cooper had said to Russell, according to the oral history, my own views are different than the report conclusion. So they asked for this dissent. They demanded this dissent. And J. Edgar Hoover and JFK and Earl Warren said, you betcha it'll be in there. Do you think it is? Nowhere to be found. Nowhere to be found. Now, I'm going to tell people before you hear me say John Sherman Cooper as the Warren Commission member, on the cover of this book, you've got RFK, Dorothy, Marilyn, JFK, and there's the commission handing the report to LBJ. Okay. One of the things that the informant told me, Mark, take a look at that photograph, and you will see very quickly who's not very happy about being there. I don't know if you can see this. I'm going to put it up as closely as I can.
Raise it a little.
Raise it a little? All right.
Yeah.
That helps? All right.
Yeah.
So you got the commission members all the way across there, and then look at one of them kind of hiding behind the other. That's John Sherman Cooper. And that's what the informer told me. And that was a confirmation. He didn't want anything to do with that. His reputation was at stake, and he didn't believe any of that bull that was going on. So that was very interesting to me. So what did I do in the oral history? I found out that he was very upset with what's going on. He and Russell, Cooper joined Russell in believing many aspects of this case assassination I cannot decide with absolute certainty. The inability to gather all evidence in certain areas, as well as a number of suspicious circumstances deduced from the record, conclude the determination that Oswald and Oswald alone, without knowledge, encouragement, or in assistance of any person, planned and perpetrated the assassination. See, he didn't believe it. And he didn't believe it. Dorothy Kilgallen didn't believe it. Do you think Dorothy Kilgallen was interviewed at the Warren Commission? Absolutely not. They would not have wanted her within 1,000 feet of being there.
No, as we all know now, it definitely was a cover-up. It was a whitewash, and they just wanted to get it off the record, period.
Yes, Gianni, but listen, people have speculated about that. There's never been ironclad proof. And I will tell you, this is as ironclad proof as you can get. And I'm honored that I could find it through this gentleman, Morris Wolf, because he was there. I'll tell you what I compare it to. what do we know about the Jack Ruby situation? Well, the Jack Ruby trial. Who was in the front row? She was there. I wasn't there. None of these damn authors and experts and everybody else who've written about the assassination, they weren't there. Dorothy was there.
That's why she's dead.
Who speculate about the Warren Commission corruption weren't there either. Morris was there.
Right.
So now we get to the let me see what else. In the oral history, I found these comments about John Sherman Cooper by none other than Jackie Onassis. Now, I need to go back a minute. All right, so here's the other thing he tells me. I said, wait a minute, you told me you knew Dorothy Kilgallen. He said, yeah, Mark. Now, hear this, because it's wild, okay, that this could happen. I used to go to soirees, he calls them, parties, at John Sherman Cooper's home in Georgetown at 29th and N Street, and I sat right next to Dorothy Kilgallen. I said, what? He said, yes, I was invited because I was a bachelor, and they didn't have very many bachelors there. At times, JFK and Jackie would be there. I think Senator Cooper may have even first introduced Jackie to JFK, but they were there at times, and there were other dignitaries there. But I was asked to come because I was a bachelor, and I sat right next to Dorothy. He called her a bright light bulb, so smart. Still being her investigative reporter self, because she kept quizzing me about anything that I knew about Senator Cooper. So that was the other thing that was absolutely amazing to me. Now, what could I confirm about that made the account reliable? I went to the oral history again. Guess where John Sherman Cooper lived in Georgetown? 29th and N Street. Now, I know that's a little thing, but Dorothy always looked at those little things, and I've learned from her. So it made sense, in terms of what happened, what happened at that home. So then I found in the oral history, Jackie Onassis, who Jackie Kennedy knew Cooper very well. The first couple to be asked to come to the White House when JFK became president were Lorraine and John Sherman Cooper. He had great respect, JFK did, for Senator Cooper. Jackie Onassis wrote later, he's a man of great character. She even compared him to another beloved Kentucky leader, Abraham Lincoln, noting his ability to connect with individuals from small town Kentucky to communities abroad. It's a question of character, really. If a man seems to you wise, profound, compassionate, intelligent, learned, honest, you're going to look up to him. And he was also loved. He couldn't help but be loved. You just spent 15 minutes with him. You're going to love him. So that meant a lot to me, finding that, because I wanted to make sure that Cooper, was the kind of person that we could believe in terms of what he was telling Morris about what happened at the Warren Commission.
Before you get into your next thought, let's go to commercial, and we'll be right back. Welcome, everybody. And I'm so happy to be able to tell you tonight that we are expanding not only the show, not only how you can participate and share into so many different facets of my life and the life of this podcast and the world we created. We are going to expand our family. You're going to have an opportunity to actually join our family. And it'll be up to you how far you go in our family. By the purchases of things we're putting out to you, the opportunities that you can take advantage of, like having a one-on-one conversation with me, having me visit your home while you have 10 people for dinner. There's so many things that you're going to be so excited. Just go to HollywoodGodfatherFamily.com and it'll have all the information you want. And believe me, I want you in my family. Don't let me come looking for you. Okay, we're back.
All right, thank you. So I went back then and I wanted to see if I could connect what Dorothy Kilgallen said. All right, I'm not clear there. We always wondered who gave Dorothy Kilgallen Jack Ruby's testimony before the Warren Commission, before it was supposed to be released. We talked about that in the last show, right?
Sure.
Right.
All right. So I want to go back through when these FBI agents came to her home, the same ones who raided her home on the day that she died and took all of her investigative files. I wanted to see what she actually said to those agents. She stated she would identify the source as only a reasonable person who had a legal right to the transcript. She stated that she was the only person who knew the identity of the source and that she would die rather than reveal his identity. Ms. Kilgallen said that she based her refusal to identify her source on the right of a newspaper reporter to protect her sources of the information. Ms. Kilgallen specifically was asked whether or not the source was a member of the President's Commission itself or a staff member or employee. She refused to answer. Now, yeah, she didn't deny it. She refused to answer.
Well, that signed a death warrant right there.
Well, you're way ahead of me, but you're getting there, that's for sure. Ms. Kilgallen specifically was asked if the source was someone not on the commission, such as Ruby's defense counsel or someone else who was present during the interview with Ruby or who might legally have received a copy of the transcript. She refused to answer. Ms. Kilgallen also said that she would refuse to give the date on which she received the Ruby transcript and refused to identify the city in which she obtained it. And then these next few words, these 3-4 sentences, were the ones that really captivated me. Ms. Kilgallen did state that her source was a man and not a woman. She said her source is a friend of hers of long standing. She stated the source gave her the transcript as a friendly gesture.
And who does she tell this to?
She tells this
to
to
FBI agents.
the FBI agents who interview her at her townhouse.
Yeah. She was a very savvy, intelligent, streetwise person. Why would she even say that?
Well, you have to notice that she denied certain things, but she refused to answer when asked whether it was source was a member of the Warren Commission, and whether different things like that. I think she felt like she had to answer the questions, but she wasn't going to give them any answers that they could use. And so the whole situation with a friend of long standing, a friendly gesture, and all of that, I don't believe that, one evening, Dorothy Kilgallen ended up running into a friend when she was going to work at the Journal-American. He was a friend that's mentioned in the Rothberg report, which talks about Dorothy's UFOs. By the way, I have a new photograph of the book of her being in New Mexico, in the area where the UFOs are. But this gentleman ran into her, and she had a copy of Life magazine, the one that has Oswald on the front with the rifle and everything. And he said, "What's that?" And she opened it up, and she had this sheaf of papers, and she said, "This is Jack Ruby's testimony before the Warren Commission." I do not believe, but go back. I asked Morris Wolf whether John Sherman Cooper was the one who gave Dorothy Kilgallen the Jack Ruby testimony before the commission, and he said, "It's very likely." I do not believe that he personally gave those materials to Dorothy. He probably used an intermediary to do so. So that's, I believe, a very credible report as to how she ended up getting that material. And then we take it on one step further. And this is where I believe Gianni mentioned she was dead. She's going to write this book for Random House, and she's going to put that in there, and she's going to put in what she learned from Ruby, and she's going to put in there about Marcello, and she's going to put all that in there. That cannot be done. But
no, she's putting all the pieces of the puzzle together.
That's right.
She's solving the crime.
But I also believe that she was aware of the corruption at the Warren Commission.
Of course she was.
Because she was given that, and that was it. When she, remember Gianni, in a previous show and in Collateral Damage, I talked about another one of these amazing moments in my life with regard to research. I found a casino boss in Las Vegas at the Sands Hotel who wished to be unidentified, so that because of him being scared for his life still, even though it's a long time from then. And he was the one that gave me all the inside information about how such a bad guy Frank Sinatra was.
Was his first name Joe?
It's been so long since I've talked to him, I can't remember, but it could be.
Anyway, I know who he is.
He talked about Frank Sinatra wanting money all the time and everything else, and how he beat up one of the casino bosses, everything else like that. And just as I was done, I said something to him. Do you know Ron Pataki? And as you guys remember, Ron Pataki is the journalist who was involved with Dorothy romantically just before she died. He was a Columbus, Ohio journalist. I think he way younger than her. I think he kind of used her to move his career up. But she's one of the few people. She shared some information about her JFK assassination investigation with, and she trusted him enough to do that. But the casino boss, and this chilled me when I heard it, he said, yeah, I knew him. And I will tell you, I heard about him. I heard about him that in the fall of 1965, he got in trouble. And he believed it was gambling debts. And he said, then, Mark, I believe that he was compromised. And he was told that if he let whoever it was, government agents, he said, or underworld people or whatever, know what Dorothy was going to put in that book for Random House, she was dead. His comment, she was dead.
Is Pataki still alive?
So that was my next thing I was going to mention.
Oh.
I am sick to my stomach, and I feel like such a failure. But I tried through the New York, as you know, the New York DA, Vance Jr. I tried to Shea, the police commissioner. I tried every way for them to interrogate Ron Pataki about what would happen, what happened back in 1965. I bombarded him with questions and emails. I did everything asking him to let me know what happened. He never did. And about 5 or 6 months ago, he finally died at age 86.
Okay, don't blame this on yourself. I spent many years on that job.
Yeah, but I should have got it done. I should have got it done.
No way.
I had to go out and arrest him myself.
Mark, you can't blame yourself for it. If the largest police department in the world, I mean, if they tell you they're not going to do something, no matter who you are and what kind of pull you have and the logic that you have, the case is closed, and the last thing they want to do is reopen it. So don't blame yourself for it. They just wouldn't do it.
Well, I feel like I let her down, but thank you for saying that. But I'm told he died a lonely, miserable man, consumed with guilt. And I think that's who he was. But I wish I could have gotten him to come forward. I had some relatives of him who put pressure on him, did everything I could that way. But the point is, again, I think that he compromised. I think he was a snitch. I think he told none other than the FBI agents, maybe Hoover himself, that what Dorothy was going to put in that book, including what Ruby said, including the Warren Commission corruption and all of that, and they couldn't let her die. And for people who don't know, by the way, on November 8th, 1965, she was found, which was 2 days ago, the anniversary. She was found in an apartment she never slept in her townhouse on East 68th Street, wearing clothes she never wore to bed. She had her eyelashes, makeup, her hairpiece on. The investigators came and found her in a room she never slept in. And they concluded, because there was an empty Seconal bottle, that she died of an overdose of drugs. I've proven in The Reporter Who Knew Too Much and subsequent
it's the same thing they did with Marilyn. It's the same copycat situation.
That's right. They had 3 barbiturates in her system. And I think Pataki is the one on the night that she died. She was with him who may have poisoned her. So that's how Dorothy died. And she took with her, there was no investigation of any kind. She disappeared from the face of the earth. Now, that's one thing I am proud of. And through my books and programs like yours, we've kind of brought this woman back to life, which I think we should be happy about. But the other thing that happened is, on the morning that she died, I have her butler's daughter, who I interviewed in New York City and confirmed this. Just after her body was found, the agents, he didn't know exactly, but they said they were FBI agents who came to the home, raided it, took all of her investigation materials. I still think they're out there someplace. I hope. I've tried the Freedom of Information Act with the FBI, but I don't.
Oh, they're gone. All of that stuff is gone. And it's interesting that the thread between my association through all of this, just as a curious young kid and being arm's length from it all, Mark Sinclair found her.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. And if you want to have some tears in your eyes, just go listen to his account of doing that. It's at the DorothyKilgallenStory.org. And of course, I have it in the books as well. I mean, it was just such a shock to him because he walked in there. You know, there was a book on her lap upside down. Her reading glasses weren't around. I mean, come on, you know, and nobody spoke up for her. You know, we all hope if somebody says terrible things about Patrick, he hopes that somebody will say, well, wait a minute, or one of his friends will say, wait a minute, that's not the Patrick I know. He wouldn't do that. But with Marilyn and with Dorothy, nobody spoke up.
Nope.
Everybody knew Marilyn didn't commit suicide. Look at the columns that Dorothy wrote. She's on the upswing. She's going to remarry Joe DiMaggio. She has Broadway shows and offers and all of that. With Dorothy, she was at the pinnacle of her career with what she was doing. But her family, her colleagues at What's My Line, her colleagues at the newspapers, nobody said, no, Dorothy would never have overdosed on drugs and all of that.
And she never had a history of drugs to begin with.
Oh, not at all.
Worse than Marilyn. Marilyn had a history.
Yeah, she did.
But, you know, when Dorothy Kilgallen, I mean, I remember just the conversations that I overheard with the people that we're all talking about now. Nobody believed it. But again, nobody would go to defense to it because of the powers that be that were behind it all.
Well, all you have to do is go watch that final. I'm thrilled that people around the world go watch the reruns of What's My Life. They're great. Groucho Marx is fun on there, and Dorothy is so competent. Go watch the last program before she died that night. You'll see she's sharp. She's not slurring her words. No. She guesses the occupation of a woman who sells dynamite, who I have an account from in the book. You know, there was no evidence of that whatsoever. But whoever was responsible for her death, and I believe now, I used to think it probably was Marcello's people, but now I believe it was probably Hoover's people. But they would have easily been able to cover up any investigation of any kind. So now we get to the cover up of the Warren Commission corruption. Well, there were several ways that they did this. First of all, memo, they never looked into John Sherman Cooper. I have in front of me a December 5th, 1963 memorandum by Cooper. He says, Earl Warren asked about the CIA. Do they have anything? When told of Mexico and Nicaragua, he mentioned da-da-da-da. He knew all I did and more about the CIA. But something strange is happening. Warren and Katzenbach know all about the FBI and they are and its incompetence and others planning to show Oswald only one being considered. This is to me an untenable position. I must insist on outside counsel. And then I have a document that other people should have found. This is John Sherman Cooper's letter of resignation. He never sent it, but there it is. And he was so upset with what was going on that he had decided he was going to resign from the commission. So those kind of things are what I found. And then because of the whole mention of Katzenbach, you may remember, he was Assistant Attorney General, right, to Robert Kennedy. Right. Well, he appears because RFK is so distraught over the death of his brother, who's with Robert Kennedy, I think in my mind, knowing for sure that it was his actions against Marcello and the mafia that caused the death of his brother. He's so distraught. He's at home in Virginia and all that. He's not coming around.
That's funny you should say that, you know, because when he deported Marcello's, he raided their house on a Sunday afternoon when he had his family and grandchildren there on a Sunday, just to embarrass him. And he said, and there were many witnesses to it. When Marcello said, "You're a dead man," he said, "Oh, you're threatening an attorney general?" Marcello said, "I'm not threatening you. I'm promising you." And they let him off.
Man. Boy, I wish I'd known about this kind of thing. I'm going to call the publisher. We're going to reissue this book. We got to put some stuff in there that you know. But anyway, I'll do something with it. Thank you. So what do we know about Katzenbach? Well, an RFK disciple. What's he going to do? Well, he's going to protect the Kennedys. What does an LBJ want to happen? And I even found a KBG document that says that they can prove that LBJ had something to do with JFK's assassination. Well, he doesn't want that kind of thing to come out.
Of course,
he doesn't want anything to come out that could show anything he had to do with his disgraceful past in terms of the oil companies and Billy Solestis. He doesn't want. That's why he wants a commission investigation of Oswald alone, and that's it. And that's the only one. Well, what's LBJ scared about? I mean, that's LBJ. What's Hoover worried about? If it's a nut Oswald who killed JFK, then the FBI and Hoover can't be held accountable. But if there's a plot to kill the president, then there's going to be an uproar with regard to this. So that's
what it was, a mafia plot.
What does Robert Kennedy and Joe Kennedy have to lose? And I put this in the book, kind of the winners and losers.
Right.
Well, they certainly don't want an investigation of the Kennedy family and the fixing of the
2 years, as you know, or if you follow the timeline, they were patient enough. But once they called off, that there were no missiles in Cuba, then they went into they got Santo Trafficante and Johnny Roselli, and they trained them because Santo Trafficante had a relationship with Fidel Castro. They felt he can get close enough to him. They came up with the craziest things. This poison powder, because he's always playing with his beard. I mean, some of the stuff you read, and I overheard. It was like a joke. It was like a. Well,
they don't want to. They don't want to get into any of that. You see, they don't want to get into fixing the election, and they certainly don't want to get into an investigation of Marilyn Monroe's death.
No,
because that's going to bring Bobby Kennedy right into into play. So what do? Well, they have Katzenbach get involved, and he goes ahead and he, my informant talks about how Cooper hated all of this, situation with regard to untruths and all that kind of thing. But Katzenbach gets involved. And he goes ahead and he actually sends a memorandum to the Warren Commission. And I have that memorandum in the book.
Wow.
To focus on Oswald alone and nothing else. Put a stop to anything else that you're going to look into. And it's just mind-boggling that's the power, you see, that Joe Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy had. They don't want them to look anywhere else with regard to this. They don't even want them to look into Frank Sinatra with regard to. I have 2 new chapters on Frank Sinatra in the book. They don't want to go back into any of that and the connections between the Kennedys and the 1960 election, Marcello, all those people.
This is investigation 101. And, to preface that, you have a body of men, powerful men with an unlimited budget and the eyes of the world upon them. And they disregarded a basic premise of investigations. To do a proper investigation, you look at the evidence and you form a theory. What they did was they formed a theory, and then they cherry-picked the evidence to fit that theory.
Excellent.
And that is, you could look at the John Benet Ramsey case, the same thing. They looked at the parents, and as soon as the parents said, after they were advised of their rights, you have the right to counsel, well, they exercised that right. And as soon as they did that, pissed off the cops, and they zeroed in on the parents to the exclusion of everybody else. And after a while, the evidence starts to go away. People die, people move, people forget.
Right.
And you're talking about something that's very similar.
Right.
So a very poor investigation. That's the way I look at it. Whether they were right or wrong, I'm not passing any judgment on that. But they didn't go about it correctly.
No, they didn't. And if you look at the specific comments that Senator Cooper made to Mr. Wolf, one of them stuck out for me. They know about Jack Ruby's connections to organized crime, and they're not going to do anything about it. Well, organized crime, I mean, that's looking into the window of all those bad guys we've talked about.
Once again, cherry picking your evidence and what
absolutely.
And you're trying to prove your theory. You're not going to prove that anyone else is involved. You can't do that.
And yet, when the report is issued, and I have the report in the substance of the report in the new book, Fighting for Justice, they basically commend themselves on what we did. Senator Cooper was also upset because he said most of the time the members were not even there. And Morris Wolf told me this too, when the hearings were going on. They were staff members. And so the members didn't even hear an awful lot of this.
It was a sham to begin.
It was, but again, I say the betrayal here to the American public, and then the Oswald Alone theory perpetuated through the years, 6th Floor Museum, everywhere, all these books and everything else.
Well, let's say, Mark, let's say for the sake of argument that the commission was right. They went about it in the wrong way. And the way they conducted that investigation cast doubt on the results. And if they would have done it the right way and got the same results, then maybe people would say, hey, maybe they have something here. But given the way they conducted themselves, no one can say that.
But nobody knew it, see. Nobody looked into it, unfortunately. They just got away with what may be one of the biggest lies in American history, that the Oswald Alone situation. And that's just been perpetuated forever, instead of really looking into what Dorothy Kilgallen looked into. If they would just think about a couple things here, because I do. If they'd listened to Dorothy, if they would have listened to her, if the media would have listened to her with her columns and what she was saying and all of that.
Well, I think they were listening.
Could have changed.
One of the reasons, perhaps, that she was killed. People.
I think so.
Exactly.
But the other one is, what if she had lived? She would have written this book. She
showed have disclosed it all. They're not going to let her live.
Exposed it all. My opinion is, and I don't like to speculate, but my opinion is that Hoover would have been indicted for covering up the assassination. J. Edgar Hoover, Marcello may have been arrested for being involved. They probably have looked more into that with a proper investigation with someone like you who's competent to look into all of this. But they couldn't let that happen. And so, unfortunately,
it started with Marilyn's death, which was so insignificant. Nobody was going to believe her, but Dorothy Kilgallen has the credibility, and that's the difference.
Here's the thing at times when I wake up in the middle of the night and thinking about all this, and I said this in Collateral Damage, it's in the new book as well. If Robert Kennedy would have been prosecuted based on compelling evidence at the time, evidence, complicity in Marilyn Monroe's death.
At least, let me interrupt you for a second before I forget. At least a grand jury.
At least a jury. Then he would have had to have resigned. He wouldn't have gone ahead and done what he did to persecute, double-cross the mafia. There would have been no JFK assassination, in my opinion, and I think in Dorothy's opinion. And Dorothy Kilgallen would have never died early because there would have been no JFK assassination for her to investigate.
Right.
So that's where the downfall was back then. Unfortunately, Bobby Kennedy got away with it. I've got two new accounts as to how Marilyn died in the book, and both of them point right at Bobby in terms of what happened. Now, I don't want to miss talking about this. The relationship between Joe Kennedy and J. Edgar Hoover. And so here's Joe in the background, as he always was, and here's Hoover masterminding the commission, and Joe and Bobby through Katzenbach, or Joe personally talking to Hoover, hey, we got to watch what's going on there and everything. They became friends way back in 1944, I've proven. Joe was in Boston as a special service consultant or something. And the Bureau oversaw that particular commission. And so then I've gone ahead and I've been able to show that, J. Edgar Hoover basically was panning up to Hoover. Joe Kennedy was panning up to Hoover. He wrote an article, Hoover did, Joe said was a real masterpiece about communist collusion and illusion in democratic society. Audiences are completely sympathetic to your ideas, Edgar. And Edgar wrote back, my thanks for your thoughtfulness and compliments. And then Hoover wrote to Joe Kennedy, I want you to know how pleased I am with the election of the President of the United States. Warm personal regards. But then it goes on and it talks about the fact that I'm so grateful to you, Joe wrote to Hoover. If you decide to run for president, I will give you all the resources, financial resources you need.
Here we go again, huh?
Hello.
Yeah.
I mean, just unbelievable.
Well, I tell you, Mark, that's I think a great way to end this episode. There's so much more in the book, and we don't want to give it away. It is a masterpiece, as your other books have been, and we want to thank you for being on the show.
Thank you again.
At least.
Well, I couldn't do it without you guys, and because of my being on the show before, I kept pursuing the truth. That's my job. I have this comment right over here: the dead cannot cry out for justice. It's the duty of the living to do so for them. So I guess I have a duty there, but I couldn't do it without you. And I will bet you, and I will let you know that the people that watch or hear this program or whatever, I'll get some tips from them. And I'm also going to steal every single new piece of evidence that Gianni gave me. I may or may not give him credit. I'm not sure.
It's my blessing. Don't give me any credit.
That's why they call it stealing.
Yeah.
But anyway, thanks, guys, and especially for your kind words about what I do.
No, okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Have a good night.
All right. Bye-bye. Again, an amazing interview, an amazing guy, and definitely get this new book. Believe me, it's an eye-opener, and the facts of life and the lies that we've been fed. Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
If you're feeling sad and lonely, there's a service I could render. I'm the one who loves you only. I could be so warm, so tender. Call me. Don't be afraid, you can call me. Maybe it's late, but just call me.
Thank you for tuning in to the Hollywood Godfather podcast. You can contact Gianni Russo, Patrick Picciarelli, or myself, Megan Horan, with your questions and comments through the contact section of our website, HollywoodGodfatherPodcast.com, which is where you can also subscribe to our weekly newsletter. You can also call and leave us a message at 646-776-3038. Remember to follow us on Instagram at Hollywood Godfather and on Facebook, as well as leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We'd like to know what you like about what we're doing, what you'd like to hear in the future, and anything else you might suggest to improve our podcast. Most importantly, hit the subscribe button. We'll be back next week with stories of the mob and Hollywood, as well as answers to your messages. Good night.
Don't be afraid, you can call me. Maybe it's late, but just call me. Tell me and I'll be around. I'll be around. Give me a call. When I was 17, it was a very good year. It was a very good year for small town girls and soft summer nights. We'd hide from the lights on the village green. When I was 17, I did it my